Stanley Kubrick had a way of placing meaning directly in front of you and trusting that most people would never slow down enough to really see it. In The Shining, one of the clearest examples of that sits on a sweater worn by Danny Torrance for a large portion of the film. He wears a sweater that says Apollo. It passes as a simple wardrobe choice, something grounded in the time period, something easy to ignore. But Kubrick doesn't treat visible details casually, especially when they stay in the frame this long. Once you start looking at Danny through the lens of Apollo the god, and not how Kubrick faked the moon landing, the entire role he plays inside the story begins to shift. And I want to be very clear, I know there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there that says Kubrick faked the moon landing. But that's not what my channel's about. If you're looking for a conspiracy theory, there are millions of other places to check out. Here, we're talking about the film, and the deep spiritual meaning of what Kubrick was trying to show. The god Apollo governs a very specific set of forces: light, prophecy, knowledge, healing, protection of the young, and above all, clear perception. Those ideas all point toward one ability that sits at the center of everything else: the ability to see clearly while everything around you is trying to distort what you're seeing. Apollo doesn't wait for danger to arrive. He senses it while it's still forming. He recognizes movement before it becomes action. That awareness allows him to navigate through uncertainty without becoming consumed by it. And Danny Torrance carries the same ability from the very beginning. The shine doesn't behave like a random supernatural gift. It functions like awareness that arrives early. Before events take shape in the physical world, Danny experiences fragments of them in his mind. He sees the Grady sisters standing in the hallway long before he understands who they are. He sees the elevator releasing a flood of blood long before the violence of the Overlook fully reveals itself. He feels the presence of something wrong before anyone around him acknowledges that anything is happening at all. Those visions don't come across randomly. They arrive with a strange clarity, pieces of something forming, signals that point toward what's coming. And that is how Apollo's powers operate. Foresight doesn't arrive as a complete explanation. It comes in fragments that require attention. Someone has to be willing to sit with what they're seeing long enough to understand it. Danny does that instinctively. He doesn't push the visions away. He doesn't deny them. He allows them to exist. And in doing that, he starts building an understanding of the space he's in before it fully reveals itself. The Overlook carries a long history of violence and repetition and psychological breakdown. That history doesn't sit quietly in the past. It remains active, embedded in the environment. Most people walk through the hotel and see beautiful architecture. But Danny senses something else underneath that surface. His awareness reaches into what the building holds, not just what it shows. Apollo's connection to light becomes important here. Light doesn't create anything new. It reveals what's already there. When something is hidden in darkness, it carries a certain kind of power because it remains unknown. Once it's brought into the light, it becomes understandable. Danny moves through the Overlook with that kind of revealing awareness. The visions he experiences illuminate pieces of truth before the situation becomes overwhelming. And what stands out is the way he handles that awareness. He remains steady. There's no frantic energy in the way he processes what he sees. He listens to Tony. He asks questions. He absorbs information. Even when something disturbs him, his mind doesn't just fall into panic. That steadiness gives him time to understand what's happening around him. Apollo's powers depend on that kind of discipline. Clear perception only stays clear when the mind remains calm enough to interpret it. Once emotion takes over, awareness starts to distort. What was once visible becomes confusing. That contrast becomes extremely clear when you look at Jack. Jack carries a form of the shine as well. The hotel responds to him almost immediately. He sees figures that aren't physically present. He interacts with them. He experiences the same deeper layer of reality that Danny accesses. The difference has nothing to do with the access, though. It has everything to do with how the access is handled. Jack doesn't observe what he's seeing. He gets pulled into it. The moment something appears, he reacts emotionally. Frustration builds. Anger takes hold. The The visions don't become information, they become fuel. And the hotel feeds on that reaction. It amplifies whatever instability already exists inside him. The more he gives into that response, the less clearly he sees what's actually happening. Apollo's influence requires control over the internal state. Once that control disappears, perception breaks down. Jack loses the ability to read the situation accurately because he allows his emotions to dictate how he interprets everything. The hotel doesn't need to hide anything from him. It simply needs him to misread what he's already seeing. But Danny moves in the opposite direction. The more the hotel reveals itself, the more attentive he becomes. You can see it in the way he travels through space. When he rides his big wheel through corridors, there's a level of awareness in the way he moves. He's not just passing time, he's taking in the environment. Every hallway, every turn, every shift in sound between carpet and wood, he's registering it. And that awareness builds over time. He's learning the overlook without anyone explaining it to him. He understands where he is long before he needs to use that knowledge. And that's one of Apollo's core powers. Knowledge gained through observation rather than instruction. Danny doesn't need someone to tell him how the space works. He sees it. He feels it. He understands it. And that understanding becomes the reason he survives. The hedge maze at the end of the film brings everything together. A maze represents confusion in physical form. It traps anyone who moves through it without awareness. The structure of the maze becomes invisible when someone is overwhelmed by it. Every turn feels urgent. Every decision becomes reactive. Jack enters the maze driven entirely by emotion. Rage pushes him forward. His focus narrows down to one thing: chasing Danny. There's no space in his mind to consider the structure of the maze itself. He's inside it, but he doesn't understand it. Danny approaches the same space differently. He recognizes what the maze is. He stops. He allows himself a moment to think. And that pause changes everything. Instead of continuing to run forward, he makes a decision that only comes from clear awareness. He begins walking backward through his own footprints. Step by step, he erases the trail Jack's following. By the time Jack reaches that point, the path disappears. The maze absorbs him. And then Danny leaves. That entire sequence comes down to one ability: foresight combined with calm execution. Danny understands what will happen if he keeps running. He understands how Jack is thinking. He uses that understanding to move differently. And that's Apollo's power in action. Seeing clearly enough to act before the situation closes in. Danny doesn't overpower Jack. He doesn't outrun him through speed alone. He outperceives him. Jack, despite having access to the same deeper awareness, can't use it in the same way that protects him. His internal state keeps interfering. Every decision comes from reaction rather than understanding. The more pressure builds, the less clearly he sees. Danny holds on to that clarity, even under pressure, even when fear is present. That steadiness allows him to move through the same environment without becoming trapped by it. Kubrick never stops the film to explain any of this. There's no moment where a character defines what Danny represents. There's no speech about Apollo or prophecy or even awareness. The meaning sits inside the film The Shining itself. A child who sees before things happen. A man who sees but misinterprets everything. A space that rewards awareness and punishes confusion. The difference between Danny and Jack doesn't come down to strength or even intelligence. It comes down to perception. One sees clearly and acts accordingly. The other sees and reacts without understanding. Apollo's influence lives in that difference. Clear sight held steady under pressure. The ability to recognize what's forming before it becomes unavoidable. The discipline to trust what's seen and move with intention. Danny carries that through the entire film, and when everything closes in at the end, that awareness becomes the reason he finds his way out. So no, I don't think this sweater is Kubrick winking to the audience that he filmed the moon landing. That could be true, or it could be completely false. But what we do know is that Danny used the same powers as the god Apollo and escaped Jack's wrath. What are your thoughts on the Apollo sweater? Drop a comment. And don't forget to like, subscribe, share this video, and hit the bell notification. It really helps the channel grow. Also, join the Movie Magic membership for early video access and a producer credit on weekly movie drops.